Let's take a look at the basics of 3D printing, but of course, safety first. You don't want to put your hands near the nozzle or the build plate because these can get quite hot, as you can see. So it could burn your skin. You also don't want to put your hands or tools in this area because it could bind up the printer motors and cause defects in your part. The printer head moves quite rapidly in the X, Y, and Z direction sometimes, so you want to steer clear of that area. And lastly, you want to focus on having the 3D printer in a well-ventilated area to avoid exposure to ultrafine particles. As you may know, the 3D printing process is an additive manufacturing process where you build up the part layer by layer. Now, you do this by, first of all, obtaining a model file. You can either get those from a free source such as MakerWorld, Thingiverse, or My Mini Factory, or you can use CAD software such as Autodesk Inventor, SolidWorks, or Blender to create an STL file. The STL file stands for stereolithography, and this file basically describes your part through a collection of lots of triangles. Now, here's an example of where you can download an STL file from MakerWorld. Here's an example of how you save a part as an STL file in Autodesk Inventor. The next, you want to prepare your printer by checking to see if it already has printer filament in place. If not, you'll have to follow instructions or get help in loading up the filament. You want to apply a thin layer of glue to the surface so that the bed is sticky and the part doesn't slide around during that process. You can also add skirts, brims, or rafts with the software that slices up your STL file. And that software is normally something like Bamboo Studio, Arcura, or Prusa Slicer. This takes that STL file and converts it into a series of instructions that are sent to the X, Y, and Z stepper motors as to move your printer head around to make the 3D printed part. So you can transfer that G-code file over to the printer either through the network or USB drive. So here is the software called Bamboo Studio. You can see you get a preview of the slicing process and you can send it over the network to the printer like this. Also, it'll tell you how long the print will take. To wrap up the process, what you'll do is watch the printing process on the build plate for a few layers once it gets started so that you have a smooth and even surface to begin with. You don't want to come back several hours later and see plastic that has a spaghetti-like structure to it. So watching a few layers can be helpful. After the printing process is complete, if you're still around the 3D printer, you want to wait 5 to 10 minutes to make sure it cools down because if you pull it off too soon, it could warp your part a bit. Also, you can use a putty knife if your print is on a glass build plate, or if you have a flexible metal build plate like this one, you can flex it and the print will just pop off. And finally, you want to see if there's any support structures that their software included for it to make the process of printing more reliable. And you can usually pull those off with a pair of pliers or a hobby knife. If you find any rough surfaces on the printer part, or the printed part rather, you can use fine grit sandpaper to smooth off those rough edges. A good place to do 3D printing on the SFA campus is to go to the first floor of the library and use our makerspace there. So you go into the first area and you'll notice that there's a person there that can scan your ID card and get you set up on the 3D printer. There's a document that they will provide that basically says that you understand the safety concerns that involve 3D printing. So you complete that form, and then the staff member will probably help you go over to a computer station in that same area where you can take your STL file, which you normally save in, say, D2L. You can take that STL file and slice it up into a G-code file and then bring it over to the printer. In this case, we're actually sending it electronically from the computer over to the printer. I recommend using the Prusa 3D printers for your first few attempts. There's also other printers in that area. You can ask the staff members to help you with those. For example, multicolored prints require a different type of printer. So that's all I have for today. Let me know if you have any questions and be safe as you're doing the 3D printing.